So, on to our next keynote. It's my pleasure to introduce Sir John Key, the 38th Prime Minister of New Zealand. Firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge Misty from Palo Alto for organising this. We're very fortunate to have the Right Honourable John Key with us here today. Sir John, or as we know him as John, he was the Prime Minister from 2008 to December 2016 and successfully leading the National Party to 3 election victories before retiring from politics in 2016. He led the country through the aftermath of the global financial crisis and a series of devastating earthquakes, as we know, in New Zealand's largest city. When he retired from New Zealand, he had one of the highest growth rates and left the country in the best fiscal position of any advanced economy. So John entered politics after a successful career in investment banking, including nearly a decade in New Zealand, primarily with the Bankers Trust, and a decade offshore with Investment Bank Merrill Lynch in London, Singapore and Sydney as the global head of Merrill's FX business and European head. So John is married to Bronagh and has 2 adult children, Stephie and Max. In his pastime, he loves to cook, watch rugby, travel, play golf, and has been known to do the odd plank. Sorry, I had to add that in there as well. In 2017, he was made Knight Grand Champion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, supported by his wife, who became Lady Key. He has also been recognised by the Australian Government and has been appointed an Honorary Companion Order in Australia. It is with my pleasure to welcome John to the session. Welcome.
Dave, thanks very much. Wow, that sounds impressive. I can't wait to hear what I've got to say. You know, look, firstly, it's a shame we can't sort of be there in person. I guess we all in New Zealand getting used to that at the moment. But you know, there are better times ahead for us as we now move to level 2. And if today was back in my old job, it would be a very interesting day because, of course, today is budget day in New Zealand. And so this afternoon we'll get a sense of the shape of the financial books of the country and then ultimately where resources are going to be allocated over the next 12 months. And they're obviously going to be very, very difficult. I suppose I'd just sort of start with a few things. I mean, firstly, you know, it's hard when you look at what's going on to really get your arms around it. You know, I don't know if you're like me, but some days you wake up and you think, oh, you know, it's kind of, we're going to get out of this. It's all kind of fine. It's not too bad. Then other days you sort of read these stories of, you know, household names around the world closing and this real sense of despair and you know, even great investors like a Warren Buffett, you know, having a terrible run in the stock market type of thing. I mean, you just see data points that you're not used to seeing, and so you know it's really unusual. And I think what is the problem really is that we have 2 crises happening, you know, basically concurrently. So you've got a health crisis, which is obviously creating the economic crisis, but until that ultimately is resolved, and in the absence of a vaccine, you know, life is going to be difficult to return absolutely to normal, and it's certainly going to soak quite a lot of confidence from people, and so that's one really big issue. And I think we have a lot of optimism that we can get, you know, medical solutions, but we know that that's not easy, you know. So when people sort of say to me, you're like, it's 1918, Spanish flu, the second wave was much worse than the first wave, all of those kind of things, I understand that, and that is definitely possible. You've seen countries that have done well and then gone backwards again. And you've got, you know, obviously terrible situation in Europe, but could, you know, once you get to the European winter again in 12 months, who knows what it's like. I guess I kind of put quite a lot of faith in that we're 100 years on from the Spanish flu. And just like, you know, there was no technology sector back then, and now the technology sector is something to, you know, marvel at. I think that the pharmaceutical industry is in just far different shape than it was, you know, and ultimately our knowledge base is so great. And, you know, I know this is a very difficult virus to control, but I do have a lot of faith we're going to get practical solutions and ultimately a vaccine. It takes you to the economic crisis, and I think, like all economic crises, they're not exactly all equal. You know, I think if you go and have a look, there are some companies actually, and some companies in the tech space that are actually doing well. You know, ultimately, I mean, Zoom probably is the most obvious example that everyone talks to about that, but it's not just Zoom. I mean, you can go and have a look at businesses which are, yeah, arguably technology, but someone like an Amazon, you know, trading well. We've been amazed. I'm chairman of ANZ Bank, you know, just how well, for instance, the fashion and retail sector is doing, believe it or not. not in bricks and mortar, but their transition to online and the ability and desire for people to buy online. So a lot of the results have been, anecdotally, that we're hearing better than people think. But I guess what I'd sort of say is, look, you've got a situation which we've never seen before. We've never seen countries putting their entire economy into hibernation. So when I was Prime Minister, we had the Christchurch earthquakes, and obviously that was devastating for the people of Canterbury, and that had the similar sort of economic effect. Everything stopped, but it was for one region and one point. It wasn't nationwide, let alone global. So I think that's the challenge that we're dealing with. And, again, probably like me, you wake up and you hear, 30 million people are unemployed in the United States. Predictions that New Zealand's unemployment will go to double digits. It's quite a sort of frightening sort of scenario. So I know we're going to get into some questions. I suppose the only other thing I just would say, and I think the point was just being made before I came online, which is technology is one of the bright spots actually in this, and there'll be challenges. There always are. I don't think the whole world is going to go to everything being online. I think you hold your conference next year or in a couple of years' time. Will we come along and speak in person, and will you attend in person, and will you take up Dave's offer to drink his top shelf in person out of his own top shelf? I'm guessing you're going to. That's my guess. So we won't think everything can be online. Just like with companies, I'm on the board of Palo Alto Networks. We're the biggest, we claim most successful cybersecurity company in the world. We started life providing firewalls, and now we're rapidly moving people to the cloud and to cloud-based services and all of those kinds of things. Cyber protection, just as we've been doing actually with remote support now in these different times. But not everyone goes to the cloud, and not everyone goes to the cloud in 100%. And I think it's like that with Zoom and all these other things. I think, but what we have learned is some stuff is highly effective and works. So you're going to come out the other end of this with a different approach and a different attitude. And I kind of see it in banking. I mean, yesterday you may have noticed that the ANZ and I think it was BNZ came out and said we're getting rid of cheques. And you might, if you live in New Zealand and you wonder why, when you go in to pay for something, historically you'd use EFTPOS and put your card in the machine, not tap and go. So some places had it and some places didn't. Whereas if you live in Australia, you'd notice that almost everything's tap and go. The answer to that is actually what the merchants charge. So the merchants get charged in Australia for EFTPOS, but not for tap and go. In New Zealand, it's reversed. So if you're a little cafe, you sell coffees, you sell them for $4.50 or something, someone's charging you for the tap and go, it's a lot more quicker and convenient, but you don't want to pay that price because it reduces your margin. So what's happened is COVID-19's forced everyone to go to tap and go because they all, they have to for health reasons. And we're not going to go back. And those technological advances, whatever, that's a very minute example, but you can see how technology is just going to continue to drive everything we do. So, yeah, I'm like everyone else. I mean, I can kind of see a really difficult couple of years ahead of us, but I believe, you say to me, what's New Zealand going to be like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now? I still think, an amazing country doing well and probably arguably fiscally in better shape than most other countries around the world.
Great. So John, I've got a couple of questions, and please, members of the audience, if you'd like to put questions in Q&A, I'll try and get to them as best I can. One of the questions I do have is related to specifically we as leaders and what can we do around improving our resilience of people in the short and medium term, and maybe what have you learned, because you've been through a lot of different crises obviously in your time. What do you think personally we could do?
Well, I think the first thing is it is all about the way you communicate and the demeanour that you have. And I think the first thing I would sort of say is you have to have a plan. Look, the world is just different today than it was 3 months ago. And that might have different implications in terms of your capital spend or the shape of your balance sheet or your customer profile or whatever it might be. And having a plan and everyone being able to articulate the plan, you might think, man, that is the most basic thing someone's told me. But I tell you what, you would be amazed how often there is quite a big disconnect even between what a board of directors thinks the plan is and the management thinks the plan is and how they define success. Can they write it down on a piece of paper? What would success look like in a year, and what would it actually mean? Second thing I always say is make sure you celebrate those successes along the way. This is not going away in 5 minutes. You know, maybe we'll get to travel to Australia in July, maybe not. Maybe I'll get to my beach house in Hawaii at Christmas, maybe not. Maybe I'll get to a Palo Alto board meeting in Silicon Valley in person in a year, maybe not. I don't know. But I just know that, you know, this thing ain't quick. So you celebrate those successes.
Right.
The only thing I need is a bit of clarity. You know, I think what I found when I was Prime Minister is we actually had to communicate a lot of really quite tough and actually sometimes quite negative messages. You know, we're running zero budgets, we're having to cut costs here, we're having to do things. You would be absolutely amazed people's capacity if you just communicate with them and tell them what the plan is to actually buy into it. You know, particularly your company. You know, and you might think that's crazy, but I'll tell you, you know, like people, like we used to deliver individual policies when we were in government that often were polled and they were really negative. But actually our numbers as the government, my numbers as Prime Minister, always stayed high in the entire, you know, kind of 8 years I was PM and 10 years I was leader of the party. Why? Because people liked the where we were going. They didn't necessarily like the individual parts of it in totality, but it's like if I tell you, you know, do you want to be well? But by the way, you got to take this medicine. You might not like the medicine, but you like the sense of being well. So I don't think be afraid to say this is what we actually got to do to get through this, and here are the opportunities and sort of risks. And I think calmness is kind of important. You know, I always think, you know, I've been around the financial markets a lot, and people toss their toys and, you know, throw their toys out of the cot and, you know, get going nuts. But I always think you never make good decisions in that. So a bit of sense of confidence, clarity, calmness, you know, it's important. And I think ultimately you have to believe in what you're doing. Whatever your plan is, and you back it. Because, you know, if you don't have that, you're not going to get there. But, you know, there's always, sometimes it's darkest before dawn, but there's always a way through this. And I tell you, you know, one thing, I'll just say this one last thing. When you're PM, you get to do a lot of things. You get to go every part of New Zealand. And again, really stupid anecdote, for example. You go to small town New Zealand, there'll be 2 cafes, one on one side of the road, one on the other. You go into the one and you say, how's it going? They go, it's great, business is going really well. Yeah, things are good, you know, doing okay, you know, always, you know, life's always tough, but you're doing okay, blah, blah. And the staff will be friendly and the coffee's hot and, you know, they're out of their way to try and, you know, make sure they give you a peppermint slice or whatever you want, you know, blah, blah. And if you're a regular, they remember what you want. And you go over the road and you say, how's it going? They go, it's terrible, you know, and it's the government's fault, they're hopeless and blah, 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 and you're useless. And fair enough. But do you know what it is? It's they're in the same place with the same business doing the same thing. And there's just a mountain of difference between a well-run business with people who want to be there and are committed and people who don't. You can have the best product in the world, but if you don't constantly challenge yourself and constantly want to be better and constantly have a view that says, actually, it's about customer service. And I think, the Royal Commission in Australia into banking showed that banks lost that connection actually with their customers. And everyone accepts people make mistakes, but I think that's really important.
So, and thank you for that. Staying with the theme of banking, and I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer this in full, but the question has come in, is the contactless the future for FPOS and credit card transactions, and do you think the merchants will continue to waive the fee, which has been waived during this time?
Well, it's 100% the right answer. When I first became chairman of ANZ, I said to David Hisco, who was CEO at the time, what does it take for us to get there? It's not actually technically us, but we were trying to get our customers to be to that point, because productivity is just so much better. You go into a cafe, and just to give you a simple example, I mean, my phone, I don't go anywhere without my phone, right? But I can certainly sometimes forget my wallet or whatever. That's convenient. Going to the bar with you, Dave, but I don't forget my wallet, but I never forget my phone. In Australia, people just go out with their phone. And now we've been into contactless. When Bronagh and I have been going for our walk, keep sanity in one place. And now that cafes have opened for takeaway coffee, all I need is my phone because I know I can use my ANZ card on my phone. And that's going to be the future. I don't think we should go back to the other. And I think we just got to sort out the pricing I don't know how all that works, but if the banks have to assist that, we've got to. That's where we've got to be, I reckon.
Right. And from your position within the bank and also your experience as a politician, what do you think the impact of 5G will have, and how do you see it will change the way we work today?
I mean, everything that people tell me is that, there are obviously challenges in rolling out 5G. It's not quite as simple as it is to say, but actually it is going to get there, and when it gets there, it's pretty transformational. And I think it doesn't, you guys know better than me, but it doesn't in any way take away from what we did when we were the government, which is fibre to the home. You still need fibre, but 5G and is truly transformational. And I think you'll see lots of businesses. I mean, what we've realised now is, this is extreme because we've had to operate this way, but I don't even know what data we'd all be consuming through Spark and Vodafone at the moment, but it'd be, 2 degrees would be frightening, right? And we all live in a world where we want everything to be wireless, and we want all those apps to run. We just moved into a new house. I tell you what, we're very inventive in our house. We've built on our tennis court, so we've moved all of 20 feet down the road to our new house. I kid you not. But I tell you what's beautiful about our new house is that there's an app for everything, for the Sparkle, for the home theatre, the whatever we're running, everything's on that. Security, cameras. And you might say, well, hello and welcome to the 21st century. But in our old house, which, by the way, was only 15 years old, had none of that. And now, you can run everything off that. So, assuming you can deliver it and do it in the way you guys are saying is possible, I think it's hugely important.
Right. And with your experience with the airline industry, obviously coming off Air New Zealand or about to come off Air New Zealand,
yeah.
Obviously a lot from your perspective, how concerned are you with not just Air New Zealand, but the airline industry as a whole?
Oh, you've got to be deeply concerned. And I think the reason for that is that they are in the absolute eye of the storm. I mean, no one is in a more effective position. So, I don't know, my wife was watching TV. I was actually making dinner the other night, a couple of nights ago, and she said there was a story. I could hear it in the background. She said, wow, and there's a story that there was no Air New Zealand flights that day and one flight out of Auckland Airport. And you sort of sit there and you say, these airlines around the world, that's what's knocking Buffett around a wee bit. He owned 4 of the big airlines, that's where he's been at. And so, you've got tremendous amount of capital, huge cash burn, even, cratering oil prices aren't helping them because all airlines have to hedge their oil. You've got very limited consumer demand, so nil. You've got a situation where even when we start flying again, one assumes you have to fly with a bit of social distancing in mind, so maybe 2/3 of the plane will be full. You go on and on and on, right? I mean, it is a really difficult situation. So, look, in the Air New Zealand's case, the good news is we've been blessed with great CEOs. In recent times, Christopher Luxon, who's amazing in my view, but now Greg Foran, also fantastic CEO, came out of running Walmart in the US. So they've got the right people there, but it's really hard to defy gravity, and at the moment, man, it is tough.
Right. Now, I've got about 4 people who have asked this, and I'm just going to ask it the way it is. Would you consider coming out of retirement and going back into politics for the next election?
Well, I mean, my answer to that is possibly yes. Unfortunately, Bronagh's answer to that is no. So I would reckon 2 plays never rise twice. Although, hey, Winston left Parliament a couple of times and came back, and the president of Indonesia is in his late 90s. So I could take a 30-year break and then come back. But in the short term, no. I'll leave it to others.
And then tied to that, since you've given up politics, how's your golf handicap? What is it?
Well, you're asking an interesting question because I'm going to go and play tomorrow morning. And basically in lockdown, I've literally done nothing. So it's been 7 weeks. So when I opened back up again, I went to the range twice and it seemed to be all right. But in theory, it's 6. But I've got a feeling it's going to be 66 tomorrow. Give me a ring about midday and I'll tell you that.
Will you have a beer afterwards in the clubhouse?
We'll have a beer. Well, no, actually, funnily enough, because I've been conned into doing another speech at 3 o'clock, so right. I won't have a beer, but I'll have one tomorrow night. Actually, I've been drinking Corona. I feel sorry for those Mexicans that they've been getting hammered on the back of this coronavirus. So it's my sort of beer of choice at the moment, Corona.
Which is brilliant. So one of the other questions, and obviously being careful not to be critical here, but you know, I think New Zealanders would agree that the government has made some very strong, quick and deliberate decisions. One thing which is for certain is we're probably going to end up with another situation like this in the future. Do you think there's anything that we've possibly learnt, could do a little bit differently? And the second part of the question is, if you were in government now, what do you think is the three most critical things to get the economy back started again?
Yeah, so the first thing I think I'd say is that, look, we had, and this is not to take away from the government's decision-making things, because, they've got an awful lot of things right. I mean, you can always debate the prescription, and look, our own cabinet would debate the prescription we had, so that's not, that's just what it is. But we did have a couple of advantages, and that was that because we were quite a way behind, obviously China, but more importantly, really Italy and the United Kingdom and the United States, we could see this wave coming. So the reason, I'm sure you probably know this because people have just got to be so over COVID-19 stuff, it's not funny, but in case you don't know this, the problem with it is that, with COVID-19, is that you can be contagious for 6 to 8 days with no symptoms. So when we all mix, then you can see how a cluster, explodes, right? So that's one problem. Second thing is that you don't, general advice is, I'm walking past you with an eye on the street. If you've got it and I don't have it, then I'm not going to catch it. In the absence of you sneezing all over me or something. But basically, you're not going to catch it. So you need quite a bit of time, 15 minutes or whatever. So the thing was that we had the advantage of being both, an island nation, we really could close our borders. 2, by going into lockdown hard, you broke that cycle of, what happened. So when you look at why it's so bad in, basically London or New York, it was that they couldn't close things down. They didn't lock things, and it was kind of a disaster. So I only raise that because, if you look at the Asian nations, take China out because obviously it started there, but take the Asian nations out, they've largely done very, very well. Like if you look at the charts of per capita infections and all those things in places like Taiwan and Hong Kong and places that intuitively you'd say, wow, they're very crowded, people live in close conditions, you just think it would be really out of control, right? And it hasn't been, for the most part. And the answer to that is they all experienced SARS. And I think they build a DNA in their system to understand how to deal with a pandemic. And so, in answer to your question, I think what happened is that we get a lot. If we faced the pandemic again, we would all be a lot better at understanding both how quickly it can move, but what to do with it. So you build up that DNA, And it was a bit like, I remember when the Christchurch earthquakes happened, and I was so ignorant to a lot of stuff. When the Christchurch earthquakes happened, I had never heard the word liquefaction. Now, if you're an engineer, you will. Liquefaction is when you go, equivalent of this is you go to the beach, you rub your hand on that wet bit of where the waves have come in and gone out, but it's not water and it's not completely dry sand, and water emerges, right? That's what happens to the land. It liquefies and your foundations are destroyed, and that's like the rest of history, right? So that's how green this grass was to earthquakes and the number of aftershocks you get and all that stuff. By the time Kaikoura came along, some years later, we could just click into the mode saying this is how it's going to play out and this is what we need to do. So you absolutely build DNA. And I think you were saying what are the three things that we face now? I think, look, in the end, the first is, okay, how do we operate safely, albeit unless we can get to level 0. There are some people who think we can get to level 0, by the way, in New Zealand, who think actually, in the absence of people introducing it again through our borders, that it will kind of die out. Now, I don't know whether it does or it doesn't. There's so many conflicting views. But let's just argue for a moment that it's going to be around in some form for a while. Then we just need to, the first thing we need to focus on is learning how to deal with that. And that's social distancing, wash your hands, report if you're sick, all those kind of things. Don't do silly things that would, could spread it. Second thing I think we absolutely have to focus on is how on earth do we get the economy going in? Because we're a country of small businesses, but typically undercapitalised. Just to give you an example, assume this is right because it was in one of our ANZ board papers in Australia. Half of all Australians went into COVID-19, we think, with $7,000 or less in the bank. And that'll be true in New Zealand. I mean, it's a frightening stat in some ways, but most people, have less money than we think. They are up to the bank and their mortgage or their credit card or whatever it might be. So they are a lot more vulnerable than you think. So getting people back to work, assisting people through this, getting confidence going is really important. And the third thing I'd say is we got out of the GFC because, our banks were in really good condition, and they actually remain in good shape in New Zealand. I'm convinced the big banks are all in good shape. But it doesn't mean they're not going to suffer losses and things. Obviously, there's going to be much heavier provisioning. You've already seen that from all the banks. But, that's a big difference between having heavier losses in a period of time and being, really having a problem. So we got through it. But the second thing that really helped us was China. And so China had started really buying our goods, and we tapped into them and did really well with their FTAs and all the other things, that our government worked on and did. I think this time, in the very short term, the critical part is Australia. And the reason for that is, they're largely 5 times our size. Half of all tourists, for instance, that come to New Zealand come from Australia. So if you can get that border open, you can get Australians coming over, notwithstanding, of course, that they're in recessions and tough. And New Zealanders don't travel overseas, so they start travelling. You can have a really bad year at a business in Queenstown, but not a catastrophic year. And the litmus test of that might be, when does the shot over jet start back up again? Because obviously at the moment they've mothballed because they don't believe they've got enough customers. But I think Australia in the very short term that's where my focus of attention would really be on getting an Australasian bubble, whatever it took.
Right. And coming back to China, obviously the pandemic is turning into quite an anti-China event, fueled by other politicians around the world as well. Do you see that as something which is going to be sustained and becoming a catalyst for a major shift in geopolitical alliances?
I think it's a big risk. Donald Trump had very anti-China rhetoric anyway prior to COVID-19. So, the trade wars have been running for quite some time. Why? Because it plays well for him in domestic politics. So it's one issue that Democrats and Republicans, agree on. I'm not saying it's right, that's what they agree on. They don't think China plays fair. They think it's been disadvantageous to America and whatever. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. The person in the street in the United States thinks that, and so there's a sort of a very fruitful sort of area of voting support you can tap into with anti-China rhetoric in the United States. I think the second thing is, Trump isn't really a big internationalist, actually, funnily enough. I think he's always been anti-trade and stuff, so it sort of suited his position. And thirdly, if he stood up to the Chinese in trade, which he's kind of arguably doing, if he doesn't get a deal, they say, well, good on Donald because he's standing up to the Chinese. If he does get one, he says, see, I'm the master deal maker. So there's no getting away from the fact that it's pretty clear that the relationship is continuing to deteriorate. The real risk for New Zealand is we get dragged into that. You can see what's happening in Australia, and it can be very serious. They can stop buying your products, and people, and sure, if you want to make that decision as a government that you want to get into that position, all I'd say is make sure you're actively making that decision. Don't get dragged into that decision because of someone else. We run an independent foreign policy. We should make our own decisions on what we think. Because this is what I think actually is, I think for all of the rhetoric and all the issues, Donald Trump needs an economy of some sort to get re-elected. It's clearly going to be in recession. It's very difficult to get re-elected in a recession in the United States. But if that recession is made even worse because of the breakdown with China, that hurts his re-election chances. And you can see actually at the moment, if you drill down between what you hear on the TV and what's actually happening on the ground, China and the US are still trying to advance the trade deal. So this, and the real area they'll get there is on agriculture, and they're still advancing that. So if things were really off, like it was just a divorce from hell, then you wouldn't have the situation where they would be continuing to work on trade deal and the agricultural part of that. So it's worrying, but I have some faith that they'll sort it out to a degree. I just think we should be very careful about being dragged into that.
Mm-hmm. And coming back to your last comments you made around tourism, one of the questions I've got here is, as technologists, what can we do to help this industry? Because obviously tourism is a major area that we've got to kickstart. And it would seem, and you did confirm this, that it was the biggest challenge coming out of COVID-19.
In a variety of different forms, technology has been amazing for tourism. I'll give you this most simple example. It's Airbnb. I mean, New Zealand's the kind of place where we are a bit seasonal. That season's been extending a bit, so people still come now in April and May. In fact, the weather's been beautiful, as we know, and they come a little bit earlier, but nevertheless, we're still seasonal. Typically, most of the tourists really come in the Christmas period when it's cold in the countries they're coming from. So building a hotel and sustaining it 365 days of the year is really difficult. And what Airbnb's done is unlocked a whole raft of accommodation options which otherwise would never be there and which wouldn't be financially sustainable if they were there just in totality, just as that and nothing else. And so, and it's been a great source of income for lots of people, and it's been a kind of a win-win for everyone, for the person using it, the person renting it. It's all driven off technology, isn't it, in the marketplace? Again, you think about, would you go anywhere now, including to dinner, on a tour, do anything without looking at, places, websites, Google Maps, how to get there, TripAdvisor telling you, whether it's good or not. Think about going to countries now. I don't know about you, but I use the Google Translate app. Is it perfect? No, but I tell you what, it's a hell of a lot better than trying to tell a taxi driver in Shanghai, where I'm trying to go. Technology is pervasive in the tourism sector, and I think there's a lot you can do to promote it. And that really in the end feeds out also to social media. I mean, ultimately nowadays, that's the communication device which is so powerful. So you're a huge part of it, and it is about productivity. And I think, look, in the really short term, it's only really going to work with proper contact track and tracing. And you're already starting to see that. My wife said she's going off to an appointment this morning, and she said, I've got to download the app and use the barcode when I go in. And I know the government, because they've taken me through it actually, the plan that they are working on. I know the story around the apps, that they're not that easy because they rely on everyone hanging on Bluetooth working stuff. But what I can tell you, though, is that whatever the form is, apparently when they've gone away and just said to people, in the absence of track and tracing, and said, who have you mixed with in the last 7 days, blah, 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 not because they're trying to be difficult, they get enormous amounts of it wrong. And that's when they haven't been doing much. So you imagine if I say to you, okay, Dave, come back and tell me who you've mixed with and where you've been, everything you've done in the last 7 days. Half the people you don't know. You went into a dairy to buy some milk on the way home. You had a chat to someone on the street. You wasn't that meaningful. You forget about it. I mean, whatever. It's really difficult. So technology is going to be a huge part of learning to live actually with COVID-19.
Yeah, and we've actually seen, if I may comment, one of our partners here today, and I won't mention who because I won't give them a free plug with all the other partners here, but we've actually invested in some contact tracing for our business here, and it's been great to see some of the New Zealand businesses already pivot and come up with great solutions. So I think that's been really good as well.
There's quite a bit of interest in New Zealand. Obviously I'm on Palo Alto's board, but I also do some work for a couple of other Silicon Valley companies, and I know some of the VCs pretty well. It's interesting. They quite often say to me, are there other businesses? And they're interested in New Zealand. I mean, and these are big Silicon Valley VCs that you'd be amazed. They look around the world at what's going on, and seeing some good stuff coming out of New Zealand.
Which brings me to a good question. A number of people want to know, how did you end up on the board of Palo Alto? Was it a game of golf with the right person?
I don't know myself.
The recent story.
You're not 100 miles away. Okay, so Palo Alto's chairman and chief executive is Nikesh Arora. Nikesh was really senior at Google, obviously, fantastic guy. Went to SoftBank for a period of time. Had a sort of departing of the ways with Massa, who runs SoftBank, and that turned him into the highest paid chief executive in the world that year. So it wasn't an entirely negative experience for Nikesh. And I kind of did meet him first time on a golf course, funnily enough, and I know that he's super guy, I reckon, like super smart. And you know, he actually, funnily enough, he went to Palo Alto. Wasn't going to, he was just going to manage his own money. And then he got talked into going to Palo Alto, and so he hasn't come from a security background, and look, in a year or so, he has learned that business and has had, again, to my point, he has had a amazing strategic view, actually. So he's had exactly what I talked about earlier. What's the plan? Can I write it down? What would success look like? So to give you an example, I mean, we were just firewalls, really. That was the bulk of our business, and we were good at them. We were the 18% market share. We were, we believe the best in the world, all that sort of stuff. But we were firewalls, and as everyone will tell you, that business is going to be under pressure over time because people are going to the cloud. And so in that time, I think that I've been on the board. I think we bought 9 companies, and we buy a lot out of Israel and a lot out of the US and anywhere else. Most recently with CloudGenix, we bought an SD-WAN company. So, and we can slot them into this massive sort of Salesforce and big thing, and it works, so it's worked very well. So what happened was he asked me to go on the board, and I said, you've got to be joking, I mean, notwithstanding I was Minister of GCSB and SIS, I am struggling with Control-Alt-Delete. I mean, I rely on the kids, to have some sense of how anything works in the house. I think you're asking completely the wrong guy. Anyway, he had 3 goes, and I must admit, he doesn't let go in a hurry. And in the end, his argument was, look, we have some of the most amazing technology people either on our board or in our company. And he said, we don't really need more of that. What we actually need is just somebody who thinks a bit differently, maybe a bit more in the real economy, can navigate some of the political situations we're global. And so, look, sometimes they get into amazingly technical debates that, I'll read the papers and try and offer a view, but I mean, really, you're wasting your time with me, having that knowledge there. But then there are many other things I can talk to them about that work. So that's what's there. And it's been fantastic. We have 4 board meetings a year. Go to Silicon Valley. It's a good place to be. I've ended up doing other things in Silicon Valley because of it. It's been really good. Really
Great.
Good.
So, look, I've got time probably for a couple of other questions here, and there are some I'd like to get to, and apologies to those. We've had 57 questions, and we've touched a few of them, so apologies for those that I didn't get there. One of them actually did ask how you managed to get a haircut during the lockdown.
Yeah, okay. So, well, firstly, to be the greatest respect to me, I have a more forehead than I have hair, so it's not the biggest deal in the world. But as this is, I would say against our better judgment, because it actually works extremely well. But our son has his own apartment, and our daughter's actually in London, so she's in lockdown in London. But our son, who's 24, Max, he is there, and we moved into our house, let's say, 10 days beforehand. So, to be fair, we were thinking, it's cool, we've got a brand new house, we won't have the kids, like it's just different, it's like the kids aren't, always going to be a bit messier than we are, type of thing. And then, these big brown eyes, he sort of said, I suppose I'm going to have to spend, all this time on, basically without, all the things you've got going there. So in the end, his mother said, you better come and move home. So he came and his girlfriend's a hairdresser. So that's
perfect.
But he's smart. She's very nice and she's a hairdresser.
That's perfect. One of the questions moving a little bit into infrastructure is, there's a limited number of large infrastructure constructors in New Zealand, and we have extreme limitations now for more to enter New Zealand. How do you think we're going to scale the build program and complete so much build in health, transport, and numerous others in the short term?
Yeah, and I think, the reason why that's going to be important is notwithstanding there'll be a clear reduction in domestic activity in terms of private sector activity. I mean, there'll be plenty of projects on hold. The government really, when it starts spending money, it struggles to find places to actually put that money. I mean, it can give you money and say, go and consume it, go and buy something in Old Lehman warehouse or whatever. But it's a bit of a different story when it comes to actually, investing in projects, the bricks and mortar largely, bridges, roads, airports, whatever. So there's going to be quite a bit of demand. I think the answer is, look, there will be some capacity that moves from jobs that are stopping to jobs that are shovel-ready, to use your expression. And I do think, I guess over time, subject to travel capacity, I do think this Australasian, there's increasingly we are seeing some quite big Australian operators in the New Zealand market. And, they use a combination of labour, but there's quite a bit of Australian backing. So I do think if the project is good enough, the returns are there, you will see them come into the market. And I suppose ultimately Fletchers will probably have to decide. I mean, they've arguably been saying they're getting out of vertical infrastructure and so they're keeping horizontal roads and things. But will they forever? They're a big company. They're a good company. I can't help but wonder whether if the demand's there that they'll come back in that space. And they've obviously had some bad experiences in recent times, but they're well managed and now, and I think you never know, they might come back in that space. I don't know anything, but I'm just guessing.
Okay, and probably time for maybe one last one, and I've taken a few questions. One of the questions which has been really interesting is talking about the property market, because we Kiwis love our property, and also relating to the Reserve Bank doubling up and buying bonds. How do we think it's going to affect the property? What do you think about the mortgage holidays and once that comes off and the low interest rates? And how do you think that's going to impact the New Zealand economy from a recovery perspective? And also, will real estate collapse a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So all markets are sort of related in some way. Basically, it's very unusual if you see a big move in the commodity markets will generally be reflected in the equity markets in some degree, and certainly in the currency markets where there's a link and all that sort of stuff. So these things are pretty interrelated. And I think you can't have such a big change in the equity markets and likes without the property market being affected at some point. And property is typically a lagging indicator because construction build time means that stuff still carries on even though the market might be terrible. It's the new stuff that gets delayed. So what drives the property market is two things. It's interest rates, to the point you just made. And the second thing is it's about people's capacity to pay that mortgage, whatever its rate is. And that's all about jobs and confidence that they'll keep their job. So what you've got going on at the moment, on the one hand of the side of the ledger, is you've got very, very low interest rates. I mean, the Reserve Bank coming out yesterday saying, well, the base rate's 0.25%, but we think they could go negative. You can't rule that out. And they've indicated to the banks, you better for negative interest rates. So we've seen that today, and they've written to us. So that bit is taken care of. You're probably going to see very low interest rates for a long period of time. Question is, do you believe you'll keep your job and maintain your level of earnings within reason? And I think if you're in that group, then the property market's actually probably going to present some opportunities for you. So the consensus around the banks is that residential will go down about 10%. But, people are coming out of the blocks at the moment and buying stuff. And from what I could see, there's not, there's some distressed sellers, but at the moment the sales that are going through are people where someone really wants to buy the house and someone wants to sell it, and so away they go. It's not a big discount here. I think it's the stuff that later on people just have to move on, where you might see, some cheaper opportunities, and also those 10% are averages, So, like in Australia, for instance, we see very similar picture. And the AFR ran the story yesterday, I think, saying that I think property's going to be down that kind of number. But then West Sydney, for instance, has had a huge number of apartments built really aimed at student, foreign students and all that sort of stuff, and migrants. And if there's less or none of them, then that market will be much more pronounced than, say, Point Piper. So that's one thing. Second thing I'd say on the mortgage holidays, what's happening is the banks, there's always a love-hate relationship with banks and sort of either politicians and the consumers or whatever. But kind of most people are smart say, look, we need our banks to be strong and do well, but obviously we want best deal well. The banks have become a lot more attuned to that and better, I think, actually at managing the difficult times. So when I was Prime Minister, I remember saying to banks, I don't want you throwing these farmers off the land, when we had various times, and they didn't. So I don't have the most recent data at ANZ. I should have gone and asked them, but when I asked them about a week or so ago, I think about 40,000 people have taken a mortgage holiday. We're the largest bank, we're the largest bank in the country by a mile, and we're the largest home lender in the country. Those numbers will be greater now, like 60,000. I don't know. But what I know is that the way the holiday works is you can come in and you can say, from COVID-19 affected, well, that's basically everyone in New Zealand really, I can delay my payments for 6 months. I still have to pay the bill, just means the mortgage goes for longer. Interesting enough, though, when people come in, about a third of people have done that. About a third of people just refinance their loan with us. So we've said, look, you're actually not on the greatest rate and we can fix that for you. And about a third of people have gone to interest only and stopped their principal payments for a while. So I guess all I'm saying to you is, look, if you're in that position, go and talk to your bank. Take advantage of the opportunity that's there. If you can keep paying, my personal advice would keep paying, because otherwise you're not really winning because you're just pushing down the track. But I don't think, because it depends where you live, but because a lot of what's also been driving it is migration, and I realise there's none of that at the moment, but at the time that's going to come back, Auckland's going to continue to grow. It depends where you live. I personally think property isn't going to go down that much. Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%. It really just depends on where it is and what it is. But over time, do I think 3 years' time, for instance, houses will be worth more? In my personal view, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you, Sir John. I think that's wrapped up the session. Have you got any final thoughts?
Oh, no, just the same as earlier. I mean, just wish everyone the best. And, look, it's difficult times and we're all learning to adjust with it. But I think if you'd asked me 7 weeks ago, I thought, this lockdown's probably going to be around for a while, probably more than the 4 weeks they were telling us. And I thought, gee, it's going to be the longest 7 weeks of my life. I don't think I've spent 7 weeks in one place. I must have been like 10 was when I did that, honestly. I mean, I used to go to Wellington every weekend. I go overseas all the time now. You ask my age, she doesn't clue where I am. She has my diary. I mean, somewhere in the world, but I'm not, And she's sure it's not hell in one place for 7 weeks. But it's gone remarkably quickly, and it's been pretty easy. And I've actually been really busy between all these online calls and different things. So you adjust, You adjust. And I just sort of think with New Zealand, my fundamental proposition's always been, we're an amazing little country. Yeah, we're at the bottom of the world. No one knows us for a living. But you know what? We're blessed in so many different ways, and we're gonna come out of this probably better than a lot of others. And I think if you had to choose somewhere to live over the next 5 years, where would you choose? Gee, New Zealand's got to be right up the top of that list, I reckon. So I'm sanguine about what's going on, but I don't sort of sit there thinking, this is insurmountable, we won't get through it. We'll get through it. We just have to work a bit harder and roll a bit faster, I think.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, mate.
Everybody, thanks for joining us this morning as well. We'll now break out into the webinars.